Nice to meet you all. I'm some liberalist. Yeah, I know this is a bad way to start a YouTube channel. For all I know, this could be a dead movement within the month. But hey, nothing ventured, nothing gained. In this video, I'll be going over some of the parts of the livestream hosted on Andy's channel between Styx, Sargon, and Richard Spencer. As a liberalist, I'm an advocate for liberty. Richard, tell us a bit about American conservatism.
I think conservatives are wrong from the beginning because their starting point, as they articulated it in the mid 1950s, was the Cold War. So it was an image of the United States as a counter Soviet Union, as a capitalist global empire. Their starting point was free market economics, capitalism, effectively, and their starting point was individual liberty. So it was a liberal starting point.
Interesting. Who would have thought that a nation founded on freedom and liberty would have people who would want to conserve their liberty? Let's find out how the alt-right differs from that.
The starting point that for the alt-right is identity. And there's another term that I've certainly adopted that I did not invent that comes from France actually, which is identitarian.
And herein lies the great schism between the alt-right and liberalists. You can go on and create whatever circle jerk you want about how great the white race is in your mind, but to me, individual liberty is paramount, and it's the most important part of society. Oh, and by the way, for those who don't know, people can participate in a collective and still be individualists. Even this clown knows that.
Even when the left attempts to use collectivist economic means, it's still in the name of individualism.
And look at that, Richard agrees with me. What's funny is he doesn't agree with Sargon when he says it, though.
So the state is the political entity under which we are governed. Individual people are governed. The purpose of the state, in say Britain, as conceived of by Locke, is the protection of the rights of the individual.
As conceived of by Locke, that state was not invented by Locke. That state has a history far greater than Locke. It's ridiculous. Locke wrote this, therefore it's true.
Okay.
This is exactly what I'm saying. You're living in an autistic, dissociated reality where you ask moral questions like, shall a group have a right over an individual? Oh, isn't this so sweet? It's irrelevant.
Whoa, slow it down. Back it up. Didn't you just agree with that, Richard?
Even when the left attempts to use collectivist economic means, it's still in the name of individualism.
So, yeah, people can come together to form a state whose purpose is to protect individual rights. You would think Richard would know that, considering he lives in such a state. But hey, maybe I'm just being autistic. Sargon, you wanna take this and see if you can explain it to him? Again.
A corporation does not have the legitimacy to violate an individual's rights, because the corporation's rights do not supersede the rights of the individuals that make it up. And we all agree that that's how we should have a government working. Like, that's how society should work. Because if you don't agree with that, then what you're saying is it's okay for a group to violate the rights of other people, like the individual, for its own purposes.
You're not living in what state are you describing?
Richard,
because you are not describing the United Kingdom, which goes to war, which arrests people, violates their rights left and right, goes to war.
From a spiritual position. Use logic.
You're talking from a abstract liberal position, and I am pointing out how vacuous this ultimately is. You don't describe any state or organization that has ever existed. Has there ever been a purely voluntary political order in world history?
I'm not even talking about things that are purely voluntary. I'm talking.
Sorry, has there ever been a purely voluntary political order in world history?
Hey, Styx, let's hear what Styx has to say. He's been listening, so go ahead, dude.
Yeah, first I would just point out that it isn't possible to create a fully anarchic order. That would be true. But it is possible to constrain all possible forms of abuse and keep things preferably at a minimum.
That is strange. Richard didn't want to address being against a group invalidating individual rights. I wonder why the leader of the alt-right would have that position. Really makes you think. Styx, I think you were about to ask him a question.
My question would be this: if we're looking at a civic structure, and Spencer, you pointed this out, and you're right when you point this out, and I would agree that the government of like the United States, for example, it starts wars and kills people, murders, and does crazy things. If you were to attempt, if you're looking at groups of people as having rights, how would you institute specifically like a white identitarian U.S. or a super state? I think you've mentioned like North America becoming an ethno-state. Let's just simplify it, the U.S. How would you implement that without then disabusing large groups of people who are already under the civic structure considered citizens, but happen not to be white? Or how would you disabuse them?
That is a good question, Styx. I'm sure he'll answer it honestly and not just dance around the subject till you forgot what you asked.
Well, first I would say that the ethno-state is an ideal in the sense that the ethno-state, as I have defined it, does not exist right now. There are many states around the world that are ethno-statish, you could say. Poland is a kind of ethno-state. There are plenty of ethno-states in the third world in which you have an ethnic group that has its own government, effectively. And yes, they're citizens, and yes, there's a kind of abstract democratic element to it, but there's also a spiritual and racial element to the composition of the state. So that kind of ethno-state is actually not terribly unusual. We have plenty of existing examples. Israel might be the most famous. Israel actually is a kind of model for an ethno-state that I would want for the white race in the future, in the sense that a Jew from around the world, even one that doesn't have any direct connection with the state of Israel, has a right of return to Israel. He has a home. And my concept, and it's not just mine, there are many predecessors to me in terms of thinking about this. In terms of the concept of the ethno-state, there would be a right of return for all whites. So it would have a civic order, but it would also, citizenship would be ultimately racially defined. I will go into all the things. I will go into all of this, I promise.
I would just have to remark, though, that couldn't that be problematic? Because one thing that we see in Israel is they have a problem with like white nationalists who have a Jewish grandparent going there and Nazifying things. That's actually been something that's happened before. What would you say? What about you? You'll have to maintain a civic structure regardless, I would assume. It can't just be racialist, like, hey, we're a giant white tribe. What about your fans? And some of them do. What about those who say, well, Italians aren't really white, so we're not going to let them in? This Turk who's got like 7 white great-grandparents, screw them. This person's a Hapa. That person, they have like their features are just too dark for some congenital reason. How do you get into that?
What you're saying.
It would. You're talking about autism, but you have to design this weird categorical system. It's not so cut and dry as, hey, you're a citizen, or hey, you're not on a civic basis.
Yo, Styx, what are you doing, man? You just got bamboozled. Your question never got answered, and now you're on a different topic. Which, I gotta say, it's funny that Sargon's getting all the blame for define what a white person is, when it's you who started splitting hairs first. Then again, at this point, Richard does get blown the fuck out, so I mean, whatever.
We know a white person when we see one. Now,
hang on, if
there
that's the case,
blurry edges?
Tests then? What's the point in getting DNA tests if you know white people when you see them? I'm genuinely curious.
Or a white Jew. What if someone's like
Jews are a distinct people, obviously. They define themselves.
You don't know.
Yeah, what if they infiltrated?
What if they just say that we're white, which they do on a
I don't
regular
understand.
basis?
You're saying, what's the point of a DNA test? I never actually even suggested that.
Yeah, and I'm sure you won't suggest that in a couple minutes or so.
Look, if you
That's the
don't
problem,
benefit from
Richard.
affirmative action, you're white. Let's just put it that way. Is that
so the Japanese are white and certain
guys, come on.
That is the dumbest categorization of what a white person is I have ever heard. It's entirely contextual. I mean,
and what about
you're not going to have affirmative action, are you? Because you're not going to have any non-white people. That's such a silly thing to say.
I won't even comment upon that. I'm
That's
just
because
simply.
you've got nothing, Richard.
What are you talking about, Sargon? Clearly he's just trying to keep Sean King, Elizabeth Warren, Rachel Dolezal all out of the ethno-state, while at the same time keeping in all those QT Asian GS for his army of poltards.
What is your critique of there's clearly a core white stock that is not debatable?
I just gave
What is
it,
your
Richard.
critique of that?
How do you identify them?
I'm saying, that, how
You
do I
said affirmative
identify them?
action,
You
which is
could
pretty
do it in a myriad of different ways, one of which is a 23andMe test, one of which is a simple
Right, so
eyeball
DNA testing
test.
is going to be required for the ethnostate.
Richard, you have changed your position in the public space. Earlier you said that there would be no DNA tests, and now you've changed your position so that there will be DNA tests.
Okay, as Styx pointed out earlier and Richard assented to, this is going to not only be a very messy process, but lead into purity spiraling, where whatever it is, whatever the group, the movement, the nation, will start self-consuming on the basis that power will be achieved through racial purity. And that just leads you down a road that you don't really want to go down, because as Styx points out correctly, it's going to end in blood. I think it's a much worse solution to the problem of anything, really.
You should listen to Sargon here. I mean, he's British. They have a long history of being ruled by crazy aristocrats obsessed with the purity of blood. Unless that's the sort of thing you want to start in America or something.
History itself is a slaughter bench. I mean, I can acknowledge the fact that history is not pretty. And I can acknowledge that it's not just the ethno-state ideal. There are going to be competing versions of the world for who is going to rule the planet after the fall of the American Empire.
I'm sorry, what?
There are going to be competing visions of who will rule the planet after the fall of the American unipolar world. And what I am saying is that we need our vision. That those who have a passion and a will to implement a vision are going to be the winners in this. If we decide to all be individualistic liberals and say, oh, we don't want to play that game, we're so afraid of the state, we're so afraid of violence that we don't want to play that game, those people will ultimately be slaves. Those people will ultimately be subjugated to those who are willing to use the state, willing to use force, and who have a bold vision of the future and the will to enact it.
Oh, no.
I don't think you can
Exactly.
properly constrain the state. You can. What are you going to constrain it with a paper document like the Constitution?
Yeah, I think I can see where this is headed.
Okay, let me address the collectivism individualism dichotomy, because this is something that I get the feeling that a lot of collectivists don't really understand. It's just about the primary value. So are the rights of the individual superseding the rights of the collective? It's that simple. And I'm sure even you can understand this, Richard, right? So, like, what I'm saying is, at some point, you will, despite the lack of any sort of existential threat or any real any real need, on point of principle, you will find yourself violating the rights of individuals for your ideological conception of what the white race is. Do you agree with that?
Obviously, the rights of the collective supersede the rights of the individual.
Well, at least he admitted that he's fine with the collective oppressing individual rights.
State would obviously have a say in education. We would want to continue the existence of the ethno-state. We'd want to create an elite class of highly educated, a kind of warrior guardian class of people who would maintain this order. This is what we have now. The fact that you are laughing is because you cannot see what is right before your eyes.
Yeah, no. The fact that he's laughing is because you unironically said the ethno-state was going to have a class of warrior guardians. That's just fucking stupid. I don't even know what to say.
It's a form of degeneration. It's a form of
Not
degeneration.
feudalism. You don't know what feudalism is.
You just said you wanted a class of warrior guardians. Those are called knights. It's feudalism, you dummy.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. This is another
A
issue.
heritable aristocracy is actually better because I believe in the power of heredity.
Right. Okay, so
Right.
who's going to be the king?
I think there are actually kingly people who were born that way, who were born to rule. No question.
Okay, tell us, Richard, Who's going to be king?
Because, I mean, you've got this fantasy in your mind that you're going to be in the aristocracy, but what if you're not? What if you're actually a serf on a farm somewhere and you're being forced to work by someone else? They could be whiter than white. What if that happens? You can be like, well, you know what? I did ask for this, and you're just going to plow that field, are you?
Life is
No,
not
answer my question, yes or no. Are you going to be happy with your lot as a serf in the new ethno-state feudal monarchy?
No, this is all completely
The answer's
hypothetical.
no, isn't it?
Even
Just say the answer's no. Just
even-
admit
of
you
course,
know your...
of course,
I'm
anyone-
interested. I'm
Would I
interested
be
in
happy
Richard's
as a
answer.
serf? Probably not. I
There
don't
we
know
go.
what to
Thank
say.
You. Thank
Then
you.
why do you want
Choose
other
it for
It's just a
someone
stupid
else. That's the
question.
thing. You would choose it for someone else. That's the point.
So now we see what's really going on here. Richard thinks he should be king of the whites. This explains his Eurofag fetishism and why he hates the founding principles of his home nation.
Question
He's a
for
trickster
Spencer. Why are you reluctant to discuss how your ethno-state and ideology match up to political theories and writing? You dismiss Sargon when he brings up Locke's writing. Why can't your views be challenged by principles?
What I was saying is that Sargon was living in an abstract realm where he was saying, oh, the state in Locke's conception should be created in order to protect the inalienable rights of each individual. When I'm living in an abstract realm, I want to think descriptively and phenomenologically. No state has ever arisen in order to protect the rights of individuals.
Your
That
state
is a-
arose for that.
Ironically, treason is one of the few crimes that can actually get your citizenship revoked. And advocating to take over and rule as king sounds pretty treasonous to me. It might be you getting kicked out of this nation and not all those brown people like you'd want. But what do I know? I'm just some liberalist.
I think these differences are beautiful. I actually don't really have a problem, to be honest, when you have a mix of a German and an Italian. I think sometimes that kind of mixing of different types within the white race can produce something beautiful, actually.